Last but certainly not least is the primetime game last night. Stafford debuted with the Rams. The Rams have a lot of hope pinned on Stafford. We saw what Goff did in Detroit. But the Bears actually came to play. I know the score doesn't dictate that, but the Bears weren't actually giving the Rams much out of the gate. All props to, that running game that they got going. But what are your thoughts on what you saw from Stafford and the Rams and the Bears overall?
Yeah, the Bears kind of do what the Bears do. And ultimately, they gave up more points than they wanted at the end of the game, but they kept it respectable. They kept it competitive. As long as you're in it, you never know what can happen. Khalil Mack's obviously one of the top-tier defensive players in the entire league. People forget. People I don't want to say they bag on Andy Dalton, but he was a second-round pick out of TCU. That TCU team was undefeated, won the Rose Bowl versus Wisconsin. I understand this is college. Okay, but he was a guy that the Bengals were counting on. Now, the Bears are just waiting for Justin Fields. When can we plug him in? Everybody knows that. But don't just bag or give up or forget about Andy Dalton. He's a decent quarterback, okay, even to this day. And some people might view him as a better backup, which I think is kind of how the Bears see him once they're able to get Justin Fields on that field consistently. And I guarantee they're just waiting for that. That's why they took him so highly. But they were able to run the ball. They were able to play decent defense. The Rams have a lot of talent. They have a lot of ability the number one defense in the league a year ago, arguably the top defensive player in the NFL, and Aaron Donald. Here's what I loved, and I was so glad at the end of the game they pointed this out. Aaron didn't have many stats to speak of, not a lot of tackles for loss, no sacks, but they showed him being double-teamed frequently. And if you're like, well, he's not doing anything. Oh, really? If one guy's taking two, that means you got 10 on 9 with everybody else on the field. Okay, so he's doing, and then it wasn't, but what, 2 minutes later, he gets his first, he still finds a way to get a freaking sack. He's so good. It's crazy. So the Rams have a good defense. They've always had, you talk about those guys on offense. They got a lot of guys with ability. I'm one of those guys. I love Cooper Kupp. I think he's underrated, and I love the graphic they showed at the end of the game. He's number 1 in the NFL in yards after catch. Okay, those are things that sometimes get overlooked. He's one of my favorite players to watch in this league. Jared Goff's obviously an insanely talented guy. We saw what he did in his first game at Detroit, and he's probably only going to get better, just like Matthew Stafford's going to get better. I guarantee Goff feels disrespected to a degree. Now, the Rams even said they wanted to thank him because before he was there, they weren't that good. He got them to a level where to a Super Bowl at one point, but to a level where a guy like Matthew Stafford would want to come play for them. So it's kind of a compliment, a little bit of a backhand, but I think it was intended to be as good as they could make it sound. But Matthew Stafford, I've always felt he had Calvin Johnson at one point, Megatron, and the Megatron and the Lions get at odds with each other. He's gone. They still don't feel great about each other to this day. But outside of that, he hasn't had a ton of weapons around him. Now he's got more than he's had. Okay, and they were able to run the ball late in the game. It was almost like the Bears couldn't stop him. So you give him more weapons. You give him a running game, which he hasn't had, a defense, which he hasn't had. I'm a former Ram from the St. Louis Rams days. Okay, so I watched the Washington football team more because the Rams moved to LA. I don't know a whole lot of people in the organization at this point. Even the managers are different. The equipment manager, everybody's different except for Leroy Glover is still there. He works with the rookies. He was the guy who started alongside me. I was the nose guard. He was the D tackle. But I don't follow him as much just because they moved and things are different. I know more people in Washington, but I've got my eyes on the Rams more probably than I have since I left there, simply because I'm curious to see what Stafford can do. Can this defense play as well as it did a year ago? And how far can that take them this season?
Great question. Interesting thing to approach too. I got to tell you, honestly, I was impressed with it. I thought Stafford, displayed what the potential could be. We already knew what kind of a player he was, but it looks like the chemistry's working. I got props for McVay, but I also think the trade, in a way, traded away a lot of excuses. You can't report to your Tuesday morning meeting or your Monday morning meeting, or whatever the shame meeting is in the NFL. Whenever they have that shame meeting about a game, you can't report and say, well, this is our problem. But I like what you're saying about it. I actually liked what I saw personally. I got a quick question for you. The Bears were running on the Rams at one point. You're a former defensive guru. You're a defensive star. Were you hearing echoes of Jim Haslett? Do you hear that kind of stuff on the sideline? Do those things come back to you when you're watching that?
Because the Rams they're a lot more penetrating now than we were when I was there. we were a 4-3, and then sometimes we'd go to a 30 front and obvious passing situations, and we'd blitz like crazy, but not a ton. But I love Coach Has, all right? And it was almost kind of like, get off the ball. Oh, waited to draw. Why weren't you back here? Get off the ball. It's a screen. Why aren't you over here? It's like, and that's why it's hard to play D-line in the NFL. It's really hard to do both. I'm going to follow the fat center because that's where the screens always go. But outside of that, so that's what I think the Rams were running into. They were trying to penetrate so hard, which is one of the reasons Aaron Donald's so effective, because that's what he's good at. That's his strength. Why not let him do what he does? It'd be kind of crazy to put him in a read and react 3-4 defense. He'd do a great job because he's Aaron Donald, but let him do what he does. What that does, however, is that does create some creases and lanes in the running game, okay, in an attempt to penetrate, get after the quarterback on passes. I had certain coaches that told me play the run on the way to the pass. Now, that's what I was talking about. It's not what Coach Has told me. And I love Coach Has. We keep in touch to this day. But sometimes when you do that, you're going to get tackles for loss. You're going to get sacks. You're also going to have some creases every now and again. And I think that's what you were seeing with the Bears' success in the running game that they had on Sunday night. So you talk about Coach Has, and you talk about how he didn't mind showing his passion, and he didn't mind showing his emotions. And sometimes people, I guarantee at home, are like, wow, how do players like playing for that guy? He's in their face. He's in their grill. He's ripping into him like a monkey on a cupcake. I wouldn't want to play for that guy. Here's what you got to understand. I played for guys who were yellers, who were screamers. I played for guys who were peer teachers. In other words, they barely spoke above a whisper. I never cared. Some players do care. I never cared. Just be who you are. If you're going to yell and scream at me, yell and scream at that guy, yell and scream at everybody. If you're going to be quiet and I got to try to hear everything you say because you barely speak above a whisper, cool. I never cared. Because 2 different times in my career, I had coaches, when we walked into the meeting room, they clearly came in predetermined how they were going to act. And I hated that. There was one time in Washington, I took on a double team. They didn't move me. I didn't make the tackle, but the 2 linemen stayed on me the whole time. So it was 10-on-9 in our favor, and the linebacker, London Fletcher, scrapes over the top, makes the play for about a 2-yard gain. This coach ripped into me, like I say, monkey on a cupcake. Oh, man, that's putting it kindly. And I'm sitting next to Philip Daniels, who's a 15-year vet, and I go, you can always be better, but what was that reaction? He looked at me and he goes, I don't know. The very next week, I don't do so well in a double team, and I get pushed back about 4 or 5 yards, which is horrifically horrible. The D-line coach comes up to me and he goes, not bad, Adam. And I'm like, what? No, that's terrible. Last week was good. It was clearly predetermined, and I hated that. I had a coach do it in college, and I had a coach do it in the NFL, as I just described. The coach in college did it to everybody in the entire room. Like we were all a bunch of morons and couldn't see what was happening, because 2 weeks in a row is completely different. If you did a great job, he was going to yell at you one week, and the next week you could get pancaked. He'd be like, you're all right. No, we're not. I hated that. Coach Has, long-winded way of getting to my point, was always the same. He was always honest with you. You never had to wonder, and he would always go to bat for his players. If management had an issue, he would back the players. If another coach had an issue, within reason, as long as you weren't completely insanely out of line, he would back the players. He actually reminds me a lot of Bo Pelini at Nebraska. Highly emotional, will yell at you, will get on you for every little thing. But at the end of the day, you knew he was doing what was best for you. You knew it came from a place of honesty, and you knew he had your back, sometimes to his own detriment. So those 2 coaches were 2, and not everybody loved Coach Has. The NFL is a little bit of a different number, different type game than, well, I don't know if you can call college athletes amateurs anymore, but at the time, college athletes were amateurs. They view things differently than sometimes professionals who are getting paid a lot of money do. So some guys reacted differently, but for the most part, players viewed those 2 guys, in my mind, as very similar and as players, coaches, and people that the players could trust, despite the emotions that came out sometimes.
Let me ask you a quick question. Take us to the sideline real quick. Do you have a moment with Coach Haslett where, the yelling was just got to a point where it just turned into sort of a comedic moment? Like, did he ever display sort of a sense of humor that just had you come apart with all of it?
No, when he was yelling, he was yelling. I don't remember much of a comedic moment. So my D-line coach with the Washington football team was Jacob Burney. And I actually met him at the NFL Combine. So you're there for 3 or 4 days. You're doing all these mental tests. You're doing all these interviews at night. And he was the D-line coach for the Broncos. And it's a 15-minute meeting with every team. So every night it was 15-minute, Jets, Jaguars, Titans, blah, 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 for every night. and I didn't get much sleep, but I walk into the Broncos meeting room. Coach Bernie, he's a large man. He's sitting there very stern, very straight-faced, will readily tell you he doesn't give a crap about being social. Like, we're here for business. You know your butt from a hole in the ground. We're here for business. All right. And he was very upfront about that. If I text, you better text me back. This ain't social hour. You know, I don't know if that's the best impression. You probably never heard him speak, so I can get away with it. So every team had a different philosophy. Okay. The Panthers that year, it was like comedy hour for 15 minutes. Then I walk into the Jets with Eric Mangini. There's like 30, 40 people in the room. They all go around introducing themselves. And Coach Mangini as well. And I had no idea who he was. Didn't follow the Jets much at the time. So I had no idea he was the head coach, who the new head coach was. So after it takes 5 solid minutes for everyone to introduce themselves, then one of the younger guys stands up and goes, "Who's that guy? What's his name?" And I'm like, I didn't know anybody. He points right to Mangini. "Who's that guy?" I don't remember what I said. It must have been pretty funny because everyone started laughing. And then he stands up and he proceeds to show me the 15 worst plays of my college career. So you had comedy hour, and then you had guys who were much more serious. They wanted to put you in an awkward position to see how you'd react. Coach Bernie was much more like that. He showed me my 15, about 5 teams did this, showed me my 15 worst plays and just ripped into me. Okay. And so I walked out of there. I actually wanted to be drafted by the Broncos. So part of me wanted to be drafted by the Broncos until that meeting. I was like, Ange, I don't know if I want to be drafted by the Broncos anymore. This guy's crazy. I get traded to the Washington football team. I don't know who the D-line coach is. I walk in and there he is. And I'm just like, oh God. I called my wife that night, like, it's him. But anyways, it's kind of one of those things where he was so serious, Coach Bernie was, that it was funny. Like, he would say things without even realizing it in meetings. Phil Daniels, the guy I referenced a minute ago, the 15-year vet, he's like, "I should bring a tape recorder in. You don't know your butt from a hole in the ground. Rip into you like a monkey on a cupcake." I got that from him. That's not a Carriker original. He would say these things that were so hilarious, so intensely, not trying to be funny. And then when he tried to make a joke, it was like the worst stand-up comedian ever, just no laughs ever. But when he was just being himself, he was so intense, it was funny. With Coach Haz, he would either be intense or funny. I don't remember too many mixtures of the moment there.
They were known as Lucifer and the Men with Painted Faces when they burned New Orleans to the ground. And when they sacked Panama, I knew that my road to redemption would be paved with tombstones. And by the time they brought the apocalypse to West Africa and the Indian Ocean, I would come to know 2 words with biblical significance. No quarter. No quarter. Kill All Masters. Rated R. Coming soon. Available on all platforms. Visit noquarterkillallmasters.com.